Hello and welcome to our extended disc. We'll just call it our summer webinar series this time since we just finished our spring series. My name is Christina Bowser and I'm the training director here at Extended Disc. Sorry, I just got back from conference. I'm on West Coast brain time. Joining me today is my lovely colleague, Amy Lipinski. She's the senior trainer here at Extended Disc. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Christina.
We are recording this, we think. It's a 15-minute webinar. We love your questions. Unfortunately, we won't have time for any live questions, so put any questions you have in the questions box and we will follow up with you after. So many of you have been following along with our spring series and knowing that we've been highlighting some of our reinforcement reports, including listening styles, which we just did, communication strategy. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. Very familiar though, but we're going to focus more on DISC itself. And so the question is really, what happens when we don't adjust, right? And you can see here that it's step 4 in our 4-step process. You guys hear Amy and I and the other trainers preach these 4 steps. So what is DISC? How do we become more self-aware by understanding ourselves better? Step 3 is how do we identify the main DISC styles of others? And today we're going to kind of approach step 4, which is adjusting our own behaviors appropriately to improve interaction and communication. So Amy, some people are wondering, I'm glad everyone signed up for this, but what is this adjustment? Why are we asking people to adjust, and what happens when we don't adjust?
So I think, Christina, when we really get to step 4, it's important to remind our clients, we're not trying to change you. We're not saying you're broken. You don't need to be fixed. You're fine whoever you are. In fact, we want you to embrace who you are and learn more about yourself so that you know what works for you in that behavioral style and what might not work for you. And it's all about having that self-awareness so that we can adjust to interact more successfully with others. If our style's not going to work, if that behavior isn't going to work for us in that situation, making a slight adjustment. They're often temporary and brief, and it helps us become more successful in our interactions and our communications when we adjust our style to the other person. And so sometimes when we think about what happens when we don't adjust, that not adjusting can really cost us and get us into some trouble.
We say your behavioral styles work until they don't. And at some point, it's not going to work. Our styles don't fit every situation. And the most successful people, they own their style, absolutely use your strengths. We've always preached that, but also know when to adjust your style. And I jokingly say, not thinking of people, but think of companies and we're not advertising, but we're just saying, think about Amazon. Amazon was originally an online bookseller when they started, almost 25 years ago. And now they are the second largest internet company by revenue. Like, who could have predicted that, right? Or even Netflix, right? I'm sure some of you may have started getting your DVDs by mail. But now they're, one of the largest streaming services. They're also movie and film producers. So these companies like Netflix and Amazon have learned to adjust. And you probably can all name a company, I'll just say Blockbuster Video, that didn't adjust. And so what happens when they didn't adjust? They got into trouble. And that's what we're the analogy we're talking about today.
Exactly. And that analogy of not adjusting can also equate to our own personal situations. We can look at it at that macro level of an organization, but what's the cost to us individually when we don't adjust? It could be lower productivity. We might have to redo our work because maybe the person miscommunicated or we misunderstood through that miscommunication.
Sometimes I think, you have here dissatisfied customers. Oftentimes, in customer service and sales, we get really comfortable in terms of how we deliver, whether it's our spiel or our sales pitch. But what happens is when we don't adjust, you can get these dissatisfied customers. Maybe you're someone who, likes to go, here's the high points, but you've got a C style on the other side of the interaction saying, no, I want to know everything about this product.
Exactly. And I also think of our C styles who are that precision and correctness, right? When even we're interacting with them in that sales or professional environment, if we haven't spell checked our email to them or our presentation to them, they can look at those typos and think, gosh, I don't know if I can trust that person.
Not only that, it's hard for them to get past it.
Right.
I'm going to out my son. He's a C style, and when he was small, we were at this I don't know, I think it was a health fair, and he looked at the poster board, and he's like, they misspelled that word, and I was like, well, don't worry about it. He's like, no, they misspelled that word. So remember, if we don't make these types of adjustments, and they are quite brief, as Amy said,
Yeah.
but if we are to just kind of think, oh, how would my C style colleague look at this? Chances are you're going to get a lot more out of that interaction.
So you might be wondering at this point, all right, Christine and Amy, how does DISC apply to what you guys are talking about, right? And as you know, we like to tell stories and we like to try to simplify what we talk about through the stories that we tell. So when we think about adjusting and the cost of not adjusting, the extended DISC assessment can help us learn where we are. We use the diamond and we often think about the diamond as a map, a roadmap or compass, so that it tells us what our natural behavioral styles are by the dot that we see represented here for Stephen's sampleship. And it teaches us then also how to identify the style of others, to look at the situation, the individual, so that we can make a strategic behavioral response, which we see with our red arrows. So we start learning what the person may need or want, what the situation calls for, and it gives us a tool, a map, a compass, directions on how we can best get there through our adjustments. And as Christina mentioned, those adjustments are often very brief and just temporary.
Right. And if you think about it, as you know, extended DISC assessments focuses primarily on your hardwired natural style. That's who you truly are. That it predicts how you prefer to do things. And that's why we say roadmap. It like gives you grounding to know this is how I tend to make decisions. This is how I tend to sell. This is how I tend to show up under pressure. So now you can make sound decisions based on that. In terms of your situational self-awareness, your behavioral style works quite well in probably a lot of them, but there are some situations where that slight adjustment will make it even more effective for you. And what's even better is this, because you have this roadmap, you can predict proactively how you're going to show up, decide if you need to do something different, and practice it.
Exactly. So we're going to take a look then at what our 4 styles might need to practice, some tips for them in adjusting.
So you first start with the D style. So if you're someone who tends to lead quite comfortably with your D style, when you look at these tips, you're going to think, what? They're pretty simple. It's often quite, we say it isn't that difficult, but what it is energy. Some of these behaviors are quite easy for us. We don't even have to think about it. But for other styles, it can be quite challenging. They have to be more consciously aware. So for you D styles, sometimes, just being more patient. Yes, we know, sometimes task is very important to get through it, move on. Everyone should be happy, right? But sometimes we need to understand different styles do things differently. Talk less, slow down. Assertiveness is one thing, but sometimes if you're working with different styles, be cautious about dominating in the interaction and being too blunt or too direct.
And for those of us that lead with our I style, we like to talk. Our eyes are the social butterflies of our group. So some tips to adjust if you're interacting with maybe a different style who may not like that social interaction as much. Focus on the subject. Keep to the task, the one subject. Don't bounce around. Maybe talk less. Give them opportunities to talk so that you're in the listening mode instead. Or just slowing it down like our D styles, right? Some of our reserve styles need you to slow it down a bit and make sure that you follow up. Don't lose sight of what you said you were going to do, because many of our styles take those commitments and agreements, and when we don't follow up, they might lose credibility, lose that trust again.
And for you S styles out there, instead of talking less, like the D's and I's, things that you need to kind of remind yourself to be more conscious of is actually speaking up at times. Your opinions, your thoughts matter. People want to hear about it. You are an emotional style, but sometimes that emotion tends not to show up on the surface. So think about bringing those emotions more to the surface. Be expressive so people understand what you're feeling. Speed it up. Focus less on details and focus more on results sometimes instead of on people and feelings.
Right. And our C styles, sometimes they are, I call them like the poker face, right? You just can't ever get a read. They're quiet, they don't show much expression. So just simply talking more, interjecting your opinions and your thoughts, being expressive. Sometimes I know some C styles who even make a joke out of it with the expressiveness, right? Because we might miss it if we don't say, "Oh, this is, my excited face," because it looks the same as their serious face. Yeah. Sometimes it's just speeding it up. Our C's love our details, but let's look at the big picture, focusing more on people, getting away from the task, that precision, and focusing on that other individual. And our C's often can appear distant because they keep to themselves. They focus on the task. They're not expressive. So being cautious of that, being aware that other people might see your focus as being distant, and let them know that you're not trying to be distant. You just were engaged in your work, right? You had that laser focus going.
And when you're looking at these tips, especially for maybe the styles that aren't your own, you're like, piece of cake, right? It's easy. Why wouldn't you be able to do it? But remember, there are certain things that are quite comfortable, don't take a lot of energy from you. For a different style, it's the opposite. It actually takes a lot of energy for them and vice versa. So these tips look simple, but practice the ones that tend to be most challenging for you and be at least more consciously aware of. And the best tip of these tips, I should say, is actually go back to your own extended DISC assessment. Look at the section that talks about how to interact with a D style, what not to do with a D style, I, S, or C. And there's other suggestions in there as well. And those are very specific suggestions based on your profile too.
And remember, when you're applying these adjustments, you typically don't need to apply all of them at once, right? It's not rocket science. Choose one, choose two. It's going to take you practice.
Choose one person and practice on them.
Yep.
All right. So next steps, what do we do with all this information today?
Exactly. Well, I love my comic because I often think of our styles as speaking a different language. So we see our cat and dog speaking a totally different language, right? And it just reminds us about those 4 steps to effective communication and why we learn DISC. It's easy to use, easy to understand, and takes practice in applying, right? Practice with your coworkers, practice at home, practice with the people at the store. You have many opportunities to apply and practice the 4 steps throughout, and making those slight adjustments so that we're speaking the same language and so we can communicate more effectively.
And what I tell people is you guys already do this. So this is what I tell my clients. You know when you need to make adjustments, and you oftentimes do it. You do it on the first date, you do it with your first, when you meet a client or your boss. We make a lot of adjustments. What tends to get us into trouble is we don't do it consistently enough. So DISC itself is a reinforcement tool. It just reminds us that everyone communicates different, including ourselves, and that if we were to make these brief temporary adjustments, we would tend to get more out of that interaction than if we didn't.
And I think it also helps us understand the energy it might take. We might make that adjustment, but we may not be aware of it. Mm-hmm. So DISC can also help raise our awareness of the types of adjustments we make, the energy it takes, so that we can practice and get better at adjusting.
All right. Well, that is a very quick overview of how do we adjust and what happens when we don't adjust. So we do have another webinar coming up. It's going to take a little 4th of July break, but we'll be back July 10th, which is also a Wednesday, I think.
Today's Thursday.
Yeah, we'll be on Wednesday, and the topic is using the KISS approach to DISC. So if you've never heard of the KISS approach, you better tune in. It'd be quite interesting. It'll be 15 minutes long. Otherwise, have a wonderful 4th of July, and we will talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.